Hi and welcome to the Insight District. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up so that way other people can see that it's a good video. Also, hit the subscribe button so that way you can see any other videos that I put out in the future. In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace the fuel filter inside. The things you're going to need for this job are a new fuel filter to replace the old one. You want to get a pair of disposable gloves, so that way when you're touching the fuel filter and that, if you get any fuel on your hands, it'll stay on the gloves and won't affect you. I'm using a tiny graph pencil to mark locations of components, but you could use another type of marker. I'm using a hook tool to lifting components, a small flat blade screwdriver, some part cleaner, so that way I can clean out the housing of the filter, and just some rags to clean up. So the first thing you got to do is remove these 4 hoses. So what you can do is you can put marks on the hoses to identify which ones go to which. What I've found in the past though is the hoses are at the correct lengths to be located without having to put marks on them. So I'm going to go ahead and remove these hoses. You will find that there is some fuel that comes out, so you want to just put a rag down just to catch any little drips that come in. So as you can see, I'm just starting to pop up the plastic clips with a flat blade screwdriver. And I'm going to drop a rag down the side, so that way when you take the hoses off, they just pull off. Any fuel that drips will just sit on the rag. So once you take the top 2, then you go in and you pop the bottom 2. And they should just pop off really easy. That clip just came off, but it's easy enough to put back on. So now I'm going to go ahead and take the bottom 2 hoses off. For the last hose, I find it's just easier, just lift up the unit a little bit and then just pull the hose off, and that way the unit is free. The only other connection that we've got to disconnect is there's a electrical connector underneath that you just pull apart. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Just be careful because the unit's still filled with fuel. So I'm just placing it there. There's a button on the bottom of the clip, so you press that down and pull it apart. Now the unit is free to be moved away and changed out. You can see once you take the unit out that the hoses stay in their approximate location, so it should make it easier to relocate when you're putting them back on. So this is the fuel filter housing. This cock here is for when your fuel filter shows that it's full of water, you undo this cock, and sorry, it's a bung, not a cock, and you tip out the water that's in there, and that's it for the water drain. Just be mindful that when you're swapping out the fuel filter, that this whole unit is going to be filled with fuel. So you want to have a bucket nearby, so that way you can tip the old fuel into and dispose of it appropriately. So if you can see, there's markings on the screw and on the body for the arrows to line up. So that way when you're screwing it back together, you'll hear a click at the end and you'll want it to line up there. What I'm going to do is, to make sure I relocate the housing correctly, I've got a tiny graph pencil. I'm going to mark on the body where it goes and on the top, because you can move this housing to a different location to the body and then your arrows won't line up. So this is where I've put these lines, and you'll see that I'll line them up when I go to put it back together. What I'm going to do now is unscrew the cap. So I'm holding the top, and now I'm going to slowly pull it apart. Just give it a bit of a wiggle and it will expose the filter and the housing. So what I'm going to do now is take the filter out. This filter is not too dirty because I've changed it recently, but you can still see there's a bit of build up in the filter. And I've already tipped out most of the fluid that's inside. You may be able to see what's there, but it's still got a bit, so you want to tip that into a bucket. Once it's empty, I'm going to stick it a rag, give it a wipe out inside, and get most of the liquid out. Now what I'm going to do is get the parts cleaner, give it a good soaking, swirl it around just to loosen up any parts, then tip it into my bucket, then get another rag, just wipe inside to make sure that I've got any sludge or anything that's in the bottom. The big white thing there that you can see, that's the float for when you get water in your fuel, and when that comes up, that'll send a signal to your car computer to say that it needs to be emptied through the connector at the bottom. So the replacement filter that I'm using is a Repco filter, fuel filter. It's an R2724P. It says it maintains a new vehicle warranty, so that's good. So what you get in the box is you get a new filter, nice and clean, and a new O-ring to put around the top of the housing that you can see just here. So that way, every time you change the filter, you should be changing the O-ring. What I'm going to do now is remove the O-ring and put the new one on. So I'm just getting my little pick tool, getting it under, and just pulling it away. I'm now going to take the new O-ring, take it out of the packaging, and just slide it over. And I'll just run my finger around until it sits into place, and that should just fall into place. Now what I want to do is get the new filter. Once all the sediment, and also all the liquids dried out of the housing, and I'm just going to place it inside the filter housing. And it sits down snug. Now what I'm going to do is locate where that white mark is to where the white mark that I put together, sorry, the mark I put on the top, I'm going to locate them together. So that way, so if you look at top and bottom, they're now located. I'm going to push it together. Once you have it pushed together, then you can start tightening up the screw cap. Just make sure you don't cross it along the way. As you go, push it together. That way you can continue doing up the screw. You can see I'm getting close to where the screw mark has to be. Once you start getting close to the arrows, you'll see that it starts to get really tight. Just push it in a little bit more together. And just give it its final couple of turns until the arrows locate. It is very tight. It's one last little turn. Alright, you can see the arrows, they're pretty well lined up. Now it's to reinstall it into the vehicle. So when putting it back into the vehicle, the first thing you want to do is get the electrical connector and connect that back up, because that's going to be the easiest thing to do while the unit's out. So it's got locating pins, should be able to locate it pretty quickly. Now that's clicked back into place. What you do is, it's got this slide that you've got to slide down in the metal frame. It's a bit hard to film, so I'm just going to place it in. If you didn't line up with those white marks before, you wouldn't line up with your hoses again. So all you have to do now is connect your hoses back on, and you'll be ready to move on to the next step. Alright, so I'm just putting on the last hose now. What you do is, when you put it on, you push it on far enough until you hear a click. Just make sure that you push down all these connectors as well, so that way they're all located in place. Now, what you need to do is go and prime, because we took out all the diesel out of the filter housing, we've now got to put all the diesel back in before the car can start. So we're going to go in and then just prime the engine. Prime the fuel filter. So all I'm doing now is putting my key in the ignition and turn it on, not starting the car, and I'll leave it for about 10 seconds just to try and get some fuel back into that fuel filter. Then I'll turn it back on again, just give it another cycle so that way the housing is full of fuel, so that way it goes straight to the engine. Alright, now I'm going to start the car. And as you can see, starts all straight away. The last thing you want to check is just to make sure that there's no fuel leakages or anything around the fuel filter, so that way you don't have any source of fire, like ignition source to flash over. So thank you for watching this video. I've also got a Facebook